Welcome to Legends with Bevo. Thanks to the Holdy, Coopers, and Anytime Fitness Glenelg.
Hey, great to see so many of you guys here tonight, of course, with the COVID situation. Obviously, this is amazing to see such a great turnout. So thanks for coming along and braving the cold and the COVID as well. Let's hope we can keep it this way and keep pubs up and running here in South Australia. Thank you to Jeff, Floyd and Deanna for getting this up and running again. For those people that weren't here, we did do one Legends with Bevo before COVID, and then of course it shut us down. So let's hope this is many more to come for the next few months. Now, Clare, let's get to you, of course. One of Australia's finest ever jockeys and female jockeys. And we'd like to hear a bit more about you and your love of horses, and of course becoming a jockey and growing up in country Victoria. Tell us all how it all began and how you became such a famous jockey.
I'm not sure that starting off with the fact that I'm actually Victorian is a good idea at the crowd tonight, Bevan. So I started riding horses when I was 10 years old. I don't come from a racing family, which is probably a bit unusual to become into racing when you're not involved with horses. But I was fortunate. I lived in Wangoom, so there was a little pony farm around the corner from me. People might know the Warrnambool races there. There's a big racing area in Warrnambool, and I learned to ride a little pony farm when I was 10 years old and had my own pony and did pony club. And I can tell you now, I did pony club with Matthew Williams, Simon Wilde and Kieran Maher. So it was a very good pony club that went on to have some very big racing people nowadays. And I started my apprenticeship when I was 15 years old and left school did year 9, I think, and dropped out of school.
How did your parents feel about that, Clare? That's because my parents would be too happy about me leaving school so young.
And you're right, and that's probably not till now I'm older. I'm 40 years old now, and I'm actually going back to TAFE now and doing my certificate for an assessment and training, which is pretty tough to try and study again. But both my parents were teachers. My dad was a university lecturer at Warrnambool, and my mum also taught secretarial studies at TAFE. So for their daughter to leave school at 14, they weren't necessarily very happy about it. But I was blessed with that family support, and I was able to live from home for the first couple of years of my apprenticeship, which helped.
And obviously, we spoke about before, you're from country Victoria. Why the move to South Australia? And why sort of South Australia and not other states?
So I started race riding in 1995. In that area in country Victoria, there were some quite successful females. Caroline Mason, Bernadette Payne, who I think also came to South Australia. And I started with Marie and Therese Payne. So Michelle was about 10 years younger than me. So I started race riding there, and I outrode my country claim. I went to Hamilton in country Victoria with a great trainer there called Jack Barling. And he was closing his stable down due to health reasons, and the opportunity came to come to South Australia in year 2000, so that's why I came to Wolfenville. I was coming for 3 months to Adelaide. I was apprenticed to Byron Cosamanis here at Wolfenville, and I've been here ever since. I love Adelaide.
Well, we love you too, Clare, and obviously your success shows how much you loved Adelaide. And Leon McDonald, a lot of people know Leon, one of Australia's famous trainers, and done some great things here in South Australia, of course, as well. Talk to us through your relationship with Leon and how that all came about. So
I didn't really start riding for Leon until I finished my apprenticeship. Out of my apprenticeship, which I finished my apprenticeship riding about over 100 winners, in the first year out of my apprenticeship, I rode 1 city winner. So I was really struggling at Wolfenville and actually thought I might have to move back to the country Victoria. And I was doing a lot of miles travelling around, riding track work for everyone and travelling to his country race meetings. And I think my work ethic caught Leon McDonald's eye. I was also a lightweight rider, so as you can probably tell, I'm 4'11" and 3/4. And the weights back then were quite light. So on a Saturday you had to ride at 51 kilos. And he had a stable rider at the time, Jason Holder, who used to drink too much at the Holdy probably. So he was a bit heavy. So I got some opportunities for Leon McDonald by being a lightweight rider, and I rode my first winner for him at Oakbank. And then the success came in 2003, which I think you might be leading to.
Yes, absolutely. 2003, what an amazing moment that was. The first ever, ladies and gentlemen, the first ever Australian female jockey to compete in the Melbourne Cup. A big round of applause for Clare on that. And what a buzz it must have been to compete, of course, in the race that stops the nation, Clare.
Yeah, look, just for people here tonight, you might know the Melbourne Cup is now about 100 days away. So you can imagine, although for us here tonight watching the footy, we're not really thinking about spring races, there's a lot of planning that goes into trying to get a horse into the Melbourne Cup. So there's normally about 300 horses entered every year into that big race. And I had ridden a winner for Leon during the Autumn Carnival in Adelaide called Devon, and she won the St Ledger, which is a qualifying race for the Melbourne Cup. So of course everyone dreaming, they entered their horses for the Melbourne Cup. I think she was like 119th in order of entry, and 49 kilos, and that spring just things went my way. And as the attrition rate went through, she ended up being 2 weeks before the Melbourne Cup. It looked like she was going to get a start. So I was talking to Leon and chatting to him about, who are we going to put on the Devon in the Melbourne Cup? Leon said, I'll mention your name to the owners and we'll keep you in the mix. So of course I used to turn up to work very early, take the staff a carton of beer, polish the boss's shoes. But I didn't know I had the ride on Devon until the Saturday before the Melbourne Cup. So I had 4 days notice before the Melbourne Cup to ride in the big race. And I found out on Saturday in Morphettville, and the next 3 or 4 days my feet didn't touch the ground. It was such a whirlwind. And to be part of that race was absolutely a dream come true for me. And it's everything you can imagine that the race is. You might watch it on TV at home and you see the ads when the music's playing and the jockeys are mounting up, putting their goggles down, the gates fly back. To me, it was reliving the dream that I had as a young girl getting into that race.
And in 2008, another amazing achievement, you're on board Rebel Raider, and it was a 100 to 1, so it was kind of like Prince of Penzance in the Melbourne Cup with Michelle Payne from a few years ago. But way back in 2008, you won, on board, Rebel Raider, of course. Talk to us through that and getting over that finish line, Claire, and that amazing joy it must have been for knowing that you'd actually ridden a 100 to 1 horse to a win in such a big race as well.
So riding in the big races in the spring is obviously the pinnacle of racing in Australia. I had obviously won a few big races, Adelaide Cup being one of them in 2006. But getting into the spring of 2008, Rebel Raider had been on this prep. It was a 3-year-old colt, big, beautiful horse on the way to the Derby. He raced in Adelaide in the Hillsmith Stakes at Cheltenham, when we had Cheltenham up and going that way. And I didn't ride him. I was actually in Melbourne riding another horse on the day. I think it might have been Cox Plate Day. And the jockey who rode that day didn't have any luck, and he got held up and got pushed back in the field and couldn't get out in time. And then he went to the Geelong Derby trial a fortnight later, which is the traditional Derby leader. And Leon said to me, if you don't want to go and ride him at Geelong, that's okay, you can stay in Adelaide because we've got some good horses here. And I said, no, I want to stay in Melbourne, I'll give it a go. So he went to the Geelong Derby trial on the Wednesday, Geelong Cup Day, and ran a really good race. He ran third in that race. But everyone was talking about the hot to trot favourite, which was a horse called Who Got You, trained by Mark Kavanagh, another South Australian trainer at the time. And after he ran third in the Geelong Derby trial, I said to Leon, this horse is a colt and he's not concentrating on racing. So we went to Flemington over 2,800 metres for the Derby, 2,500 metres for the Derby, and we put blinkers on him to switch him on. Which is now my favourite gear change when I do the form for doing your tips, to keep an eye out for the blinkers on. And he went into that race and we drew barrier 15 with the blinkers on, and it was one of those days where you have a race plan, let's get out there and beat the favourite, how are we going to do that? So Leon and I had breakfast that morning. Yes, I could eat breakfast. Did a bit of toast and a coffee at the track shop. And we talked about, so what are we going to do? And he said, Leon said to me, look, we can outstay Who Got You if it's ran at a right tempo and if it's ran to suit stayers. So we went out there to think, okay, I need to outride Michael Rod. He might still be able to beat me, but I need to be able to make sure I'm in front of Michael Rod at the top of the straight and make sure it's a good staying test. So from barrier 15, we went back and I slotted in just after the winning post the first time outside of Dwayne Dunn, who drew barrier 2. He said, looked across at me and said, how did you get here, Jock? So it's just one of those dream runs where I got out of the barriers and slotted in to be one off the fence. And I bided my time down the traditional, go down what the John Letts calls what's the hotel called? Down the side, there's a lakeside, and then Chiquita Lodge, beg your pardon. He always talks about Chiquita Lodge. So that's when you start making your move down the back straight. I thought to myself, it's a bit early, but I'm going to go early, make sure I'm in front of Michael Rod. So I hooked out 3 wide and started the move, still had some cover. At the top of the straight, I actually nearly waited too long because Michael Rod had me on my outside on Who've Got You. And I had to give him a hip and shoulder and get out. So at 300 metres, I made contact with Who've Got You and I went for home. And the crowd is roaring, and I'm thinking they're cheering for Who've Got You. I didn't realise I was getting further and further in front. I had my head down, was riding, and it wasn't until, honestly, from here to Justin on my camera that I realised I'm actually going to win this race. And I just had this surge of blood go through my body, and my legs went to jelly, and I could hardly do the salute over the line, but yeah, pumping that air. And then I thought, we have just pulled this off. It was such a really good achievement to win.
Yeah, that's unbelievable, Claire. Well done to you on that one. And obviously, you can see the smile on your face. You love talking about it as well. Now, one thing I'd love to hear, because we all love the banter in sport and stuff like that. And, you know, being a male-dominant sport with which horse racing is there a fair bit of banter when you're racing? And who are some of the more funnier jockeys? Because Damien Oliver strikes me as being one of the real funny ones. Who are some of the funny ones?
Not so much Damien. Look, I can tell you that, especially when I first started back in the 95, 96, is that whenever I beat one of the male jockeys, the other guys would rib him, you know, you got beaten by a girl, you know, Sheila beat you, that kind of thing. So I kind of wore that bit proudly, and I think a lot of them, especially when I started, a lot of the guys actually mentored me and helped me. I think they're a bit proud of me, to be honest, that I could hold my own. So I had a good experience with my fellow colleagues and jockeys. I think that's because it's an odd industry where the main competitors you're riding against, we share the same change rooms, we sit next to each other. It's one of the only sports that happens. And we're out there in a race, and if one of us does something wrong, it can have dire consequences. So we need to make sure that although we're all riding competitively, we're also riding fairly and giving each other the room they need. So I think it becomes a bit of a different feel as competitors. Yeah, so respect each other. But there is a bit of banter, and in the race, there's a lot of oi, 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 inside, outside. You know, give us a room. One inside. Or you call out because when you're crossing, you can't always see behind you, so you let them know there's one on my inside. Keep going, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of that sort of shouting and carrying on in the actual race. Probably the best sledge I ever had was actually from the crowd. So, I had one of the punters yelled out to me one day, it's at Cheltenham, and there's a 4-horse field, and I got caught 3 wide. So the spray was probably warranted, but on the way back in, this bloke yelled out, Lindop, get back to the kitchen. But the sad part about this, I actually can't cook either, so there's not much hope really there. But yeah, so I had a few sprays and odds and ends, and run-ins with a couple of jockeys. Probably one I can tell you is Stephen King in particular. So Stephen King one day at Wolford Hill, I was riding for the late David Balfour, one of my favourite horses still called Oppenoni. And Stephen King and I had a bit of a buffering at the top of the straight at Wolford Hill, and you know, there's words exchanged and a few probably words I can't say right here, and I came back into the mounting yard and I ran I ran second, and Stephen King had won the race. And I said to Balfour, don't worry, we'll win this in the room. So I went straight into the steward's room, like to lodge a protest against the winner, Stephen King. I was pretty fired up at the time. So I'm giving my evidence, and I had my owner there, and David Balfour's representing the owners, and Stephen King's in there. You know, Stephen took my running, Stephen cut me down, it's cost me 2 lengths, the margin's half a length. So the result comes back in, of course, and upheld. I win the race, Stephen runs second. And as we're leaving the room, I normally shake hands with the other rider and, you know, all's fair in love and war, and he says to me, I wouldn't want to be getting home to you at 3 a.m. in the morning. Meaning that he'd been out all night. So anyway, but that was kind of fun.
Yeah. And you've touched on some of your amazing achievements over your career, Claire. Talk to us through more about your ups and downs. Obviously 2014 was one of the toughest ones when you had that nasty fall, but yeah, tell us more about your ups and downs of your career.
So obviously with the racehorses, we're racing at 60, 70 kilometres an hour, and even in training I've had some tumbles where I've been injured, but the most significant injury was 2014 when I had a fall off Gambling Guru. And just to tell you what happened, so Gambling Guru, the horse's stride, if you misjudge a horse's hoof in front of you, your horse's heel hits their heel and it takes their foot from underneath them. So Gambling Guru was really pulling very hard that day, and he was getting too strong, and his head started to come up, which means that his legs came up, which meant the horse in front of me got connected with its legs at the same time. So he lost his front leg and went down and rolled, and I rolled underneath him. And I will say that Gambling Guru got up and was fine, so he was all right, but I got squashed underneath him, and I was laying there on the inside of the running rail in the gutter at about the 1,000-metre mark at Morphettville. And the only person who can see me is Terry McCullough, the race caller. So I'm thinking, I have to wave, because my mum's always said, make sure you get up so I know you're all right. So I'm trying to get up and trying to wave, but honestly couldn't move. And I had broken 14 ribs in multiple places. So now I know why I couldn't get up. That's probably been my most debilitating injury. Also fractured my shoulder and scapula. And that's probably been one of the most injuries I've had trouble to overcome, and have a bit of grief from it now. It took me 5 months to get back to the racing. But that next season I came back and won the premiership, so yeah, got back on the horse.
And what were some of the other achievements? Obviously in the 1,432 race wins, you must have had some more achievements to tell us all about.
Well, thank you. I've had 3 premierships in South Australia, which are probably very significant now in hindsight. And one of my favourite wins was up in the Gold Coast in Queensland, actually, the Magic Millions on Augusta Proud. She's another one of my favourites. Okay, is there anything else that comes to mind? I can keep bragging all night if you like.
No, that's fine. And obviously there's some great female and male jockeys coming through, Claire. What sort of advice do you give them, for, I guess, advice that you've learned from over your career for those up-and-coming jockeys?
Yeah, it's a different game now than when I was first starting. I think now jockeys are rushed a little bit and become professional riders rather than horsemen first, and that's something I would like to see addressed at the Apprentice Academy. And that's just one thing of my passion. I'm actually currently, doing assessment and training certificates so I can be qualified to help teach and coach and mentor some riders. Because I don't think there's enough done for the basics, I think. I heard an interview with Brett Lee just recently, fast bowler, and he was asked, what advice do you give young up-and-coming bowlers? And he said, I take the ball out of their hand and tell them to run. And I thought, that's actually true. He's talking about getting speed and getting fit. And I actually think a lot more work needs to be done with the younger riders on their fitness and their basic core before they actually start riding races. And that horsemanship skill, I think, needs to be a little bit more polished. But my first advice I'd say to someone who is wanting to become a jockey is that, do you love horses? Because you have to have that passion. Because what's kept me going when I have had my bad days is remembering that 10-year-old girl who just want to ride horses for the fun of it.
I think that's great advice. And recently we saw the Michelle Payne Ride Like a Girl, which was one of the amazing documentaries that I've seen, and sort of a lot of people have seen it as well. Could we ever see Clare Lindop in a documentary? Because I'd be more than happy to host it if you're looking for something.
Only if you and Justin are doing it, I think. No, I think it's funny because the Melbourne Cup is the race in Australia that is the most amazing race. I think it says a lot about our culture because it's actually a handicap race. Pardon me. So the Melbourne Cup is an Aussie race because anyone can enter, anyone has a chance to win because it's a handicap. Any horse can be against, the biggest shake can have the most well-bred horse, but you can get in with your small, cheap horse and you can have a crack because of the handicap. So overseas and in Europe in particular, the weight for age races are their pinnacle races. So the Derby for them is their big race. So for example, me winning the Derby is probably more significant when I go to Europe and ride over there in England, etc., than actually is in Australia. So that's just interesting. I find that winning a Derby didn't actually mean a lot to Australians like the Melbourne Cup meant to us as Australia. But I love that about the Melbourne Cup. That's why it's such a special race.
Well, I'll certainly be more than happy to host it, so maybe we'll talk after the show about that. And yeah, Justin will be more than happy to film it, of course, as well. And outside of horse racing, you're doing some wonderful stuff with charity work, Claire, and doing some emceeing as well. Tell us more about that.
Thanks, Bevan. So I think my journey outside of racing now, well, firstly, I'm actually a City of Holdfast Bay councillor. I'm living in Brighton, so although the Holdy isn't actually in my area, I do love the area and support it. Sorry guys. Oh, I love the variety though. I do actually support the variety bash. I went on the bash a couple of years ago. So I'm also Liquid Heroes Ambassador, which although we haven't done many functions this year, I do speak at their Melbourne Cup luncheon they host every year. And I've done a whole range of bits and pieces. I would actually like to take my story around, particularly to schools. I love to be able to take my story to teenagers about following their dreams and believing in themselves and overcoming challenges. So that's something I'd like to do a little bit more of.
Well, it's been an absolute blast hearing your story, Claire. I've chatted to you before in the past, which I've loved, and tonight, obviously, it's great to share it in front of all these wonderful people, and thanks so much for joining us. A big round of applause to Clare Lindop.